Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night just because you're so thirsty that you literally just wake yourself up? Well, this happened to me when I was younger, and I literally just woke up and had that starving thirst for water. You just need to drink it. And everyone knows that walk you do in the middle of the night where you're trying to be quiet and you're tiptoeing and you're kind of trying not to fall but trying not to be loud. And you don't want to turn on the lights because you don't want to wake everyone up in the middle of the night. So as I was a kid and walking through my house, tiptoeing around, trying not to wake up my parents, I decided that I'm not going to turn the lights on and I'm going to slowly walk towards the kitchen. And we have a long hallway that goes into our kitchen. So as I'm slowly walking through this hallway, I put my foot down, and to my surprise, I scream. And I can hear now my parents are up, and they're coming because they're wondering why their child has just screamed in the middle of the night. And I lift my foot up, and I look under my foot, and it was a giant scorpion.
Oh.
I had stepped on a scorpion, and the stinger of the scorpion had gone through my foot. I don't know if you've been stung by a scorpion, but it hurts a lot. And as I was walking in the hallway, I stepped on it, and my parents come in, and they're like, well, what happened? And I'm kind of frustrated and what do you mean what happened? I stepped on a scorpion. And so I look at them and they said, well, why were you walking in the middle of the hallway at night? Well, I'm thirsty. Well, why didn't you turn on the lights? It was something that I should have done as I was trying to be considerate of them. They said, why don't you turn on the lights? Well, I wanted to be considerate. And knowing that, maybe I probably should have turned on the lights. But as I was walking down my hallway, I realized I had the tool in which I could use to light the path, but I decided not to use it. So, there are many paths in our lives that we have. For me, it was the path from my bedroom all the way to my kitchen, and I happened to step on a scorpion in the middle of that path. But we all have pathways. We all have paths in our lives. So today, I want to talk about a path. I want to talk about how God's Word lights our path. So I'll be reading out of Psalm 119, 105 through 112. But before we do, I want to give a little context as to the passage that we're going to be going through. For psalms in general, they can be poems, laments, songs. For this psalm is a poem. And specifically, it's an acrostic poem. That means that at the beginning of every line, there is a letter. And that letter will go on through the lines to spell out a word or phrase. In this poem, in this psalm, it goes on to spell the Hebrew alphabet. So as you go through, each 8 verses that it goes through, the first 8 will be Aleph, the next 8, Bet, and so on and so forth. Why is it important that the psalmist decides to do that? Well, to know that, we must know what the psalm is talking about. And this psalm is filled with ideas about God's Word. So, for the psalmist, the Hebrew alphabet is foundational to the language. And he's making the connection that just as the Hebrew alphabet's foundational to the language, that God's Word is foundational to his life. So as we read Psalm 119, 105 through 112. By your words, I can see where I'm going. You throw a beam of light on my dark path. I've committed myself, and I'll never turn back from living by your righteous order. Everything's falling apart on me, O God. Put me together again with your word. Weave me with your finest sayings, God. Teach me your holy rules. My life is as close as my own hands. But I do not forget what you have revealed. The wicked do their best to throw me off track, but I don't swerve an inch from your course. I inherited your book on living. It's mine forever. What a gift. And how happy it makes me. I concentrate on doing exactly what you say. I always have, and I always will. As you can see, the beginning of the psalm here talks about God's word shining light on a path. The psalmist, as he works through this poem, talks about how he's committed to God's path, how he's committed to his word. Even so, he actually uses 6 different words to describe God's word, just in these verses. So he's committed to what God is doing in his life, but crisis has come upon his life. And he says, God, everything is falling apart. Everything I know is crumbling. But teach me your word. Put me back together. So as we come back, the psalmist, to the beginning, the psalmist is talking about this idea. That God's word gives light to our path. So, if God's word gives light to our path, how do we understand light? I believe God uses light to give us vision, to see where God is and where he's going. For the Israelites, God gave many ways in which he was a light to their path. He was a pillar of fire by day, of smoke by night. As they traveled through the wilderness, he gave them that sign. But more importantly, I think he gives them another sign. In the Hebrew Scriptures, they talk about a place called the tabernacle. The tabernacle was where God dwelled, the place where God showed up. And in that tabernacle, God commanded the Israelites to build a golden lampstand, which we call the menorah. So that menorah, which is a lampstand that has leaves that come out from the side that form 7 different candles. Now that menorah was supposed to be lit day and night in the tabernacle. And just as the menorah was supposed to be lit day and night, as it gave light to the tabernacle, God's word gives light to our paths so that we too can see God. But God's word isn't just the words that we read in our Bible. It's also his voice. In Genesis, God created the heavens and the earth and light with his voice, with just his word. He created all existence with that word. And we now have that word entrusted to us and in our hearts. Just as the psalmist says, I inherited your book on living. It's mine forever. This word is joyful to the psalmist. It's joyful to him. For that word is his testimony. It's God's testimony in his life. And it's our testimony. For his word is a light to our path. Well, we come to learn that God's word is a light to our path. We ask the question, have you ever been lost on a path, on your path? Like you're going and your path just disappears. You feel like you're trying to follow God, like you've done everything to the T, yet you can't grasp it, you can't feel it, you feel like you're just lost in the wilderness. While you've read His Word, you've been there, you know what He's doing in your life, but yet you just can't feel like what that next step is going to be. Where is that path? So as we wrestle with the question, have you ever been lost? We also need to understand that there are going to be times in our lives where we don't know the next step, where we don't know what's happening next. And there's going to be things that are ambiguous. And as we leave this room, we all will be on different paths. We'll all go our separate ways. But we have this in common. We all will carry God's Word. So, how do we find our way? What do we do when our path is unclear? As seminary students, it feels like our paths are very unclear. Maybe we have no idea what we're going to do after graduation. Maybe you have a plan. But no two paths is the same. We will all go different ways. And we have in common God's Word that will light our path. But as seminary students, we are entrusted with this task. That as we walk out of these doors, we will be leaders. We will be leaders in our churches, in our homes, in our communities. And we are going to be faced with those people coming to us, asking us, what do? I cannot hear God's voice. What do? My path is unclear. So we are charged with this. We must be examples of what to do when our path is unclear. So how can we do that even when we feel like everything is falling apart, like we have this burden? We want to be good examples, yet we just don't know how to do it because our life feels so crazy. Well, don't worry, the psalmist felt the same way. The psalmist understands that everything is falling apart in their life, but yet they trust in God's Word because they know that it is a light unto their path. So what do? How can God's Word be a light unto our path? We do this first by remembering that God has been faithful in the past when our path is unclear. So take a second. Think about when God was faithful in your life, when your path was unclear. For me, when my path was unclear, it was when I experienced loss, when someone near to me died. When I was in my deepest hurt, my deepest sorrows, with grief at every corner, not knowing what to do, God spoke. God's Word permeated my whole being, as if it was the only thing that I needed at that moment. And what God said to me in those moments actually would lead me on a path to come to seminary. While I didn't know the next step, I was still stricken in grief, not knowing where to turn or what to do. But I trusted that God would guide me. When was God faithful in a time where your path was unsure? Secondly, we do this. We let God's Word